everybody, and welcome to this time lapse. We've got here porcelain, apples and oak is what I've called it. It's a lovely little still life. I'm working on the dark grey pastel matte paper here. And I've got a very rough sketch, kind of like just the placement of the main objects, being the ginger jar and the apples, really. But I tend to find that the more I pastel, like the longer I pastel, the less detail I tend to go in with in the initial stage. I tend to get more detail in as I go along and start to put the pastel on the paper. That's just the way I roll these days. Anyway, got a nice background in there, lots of Terry Ludwig's using the Dark Intense 2 set. They've got some lovely dark, like bluey navy greys, and I've also used Grey 13 from Unison, which is one of my most repurchased pastels. It's like a very dark browny black is the best way to describe it. It's definitely not black. It's definitely got a lot of brown in there, but yeah, it's nice and dark still. So you can see that I go in first with my pastel pencils and I create the shape. So I created the shape of the oak leaf as well as the little berries, and I use a pastel pencil because if I make any mistake, it's so easy to correct it. The pigment isn't very strong and you can just rub it off with your finger and mush it into your background, no problem. So I do go in to map in the shapes with a pastel pencil quite often, and especially in this one. Using a mixture of pastels, a lot of these beautiful autumnal browns are from Mount Vision. They do beautiful red base browns, and so does Unison actually. And then I've used quite a bit of Unison in the little red berries and some Sennelier, because if you want that punch of color, Sennelier really do a beautiful job at really saturated high chroma pastels. Again, using the pastel pencil, once I put down the pastel stick, I'll also manipulate the pastel with the pastel pencil. So the berries weren't quite round enough, because of the placement of the soft pastel. When I came to put on the paper, they weren't quite round enough. So all you do is you take your pastel pencil and you create that round shape. It's really quite easy. Pastel pencils I use probably in every single work that I do. So a mixture of the hard pastels, pastel pencils and soft pastels. They just help me get to the place I need to be in my work. Again, here mapping out with the pastel pencils. Working a little bit on this apple. Now, I don't record it, but I actually did go back and darken down the apple, because if you look at the reference photograph, that apple is quite light, but because it's so light, your eyes are immediately drawn to it, and I don't want that. I want an open apple because I think it adds interest, but it's really not about that one open apple. So I actually do go and darken it down a bit, because obviously darker colors recede, bright colors come forward. So that's a nice little trick just to keep that in mind. If something's popping out and you don't want it to, darken it down. So starting on one of my favorite things to pastel, that being either bone china or terracotta pots. I absolutely love it. Here we've got our porcelain ginger jar. You can see how dark I'm going. So obviously this is a white based ginger jar, right, with dark blue motif on it, but the base of it is white, yet I haven't used any white. You saw how dark I went with some dark browns. Sometimes it can be deceiving because you're painting a white object. You think, oh, I've got to just use all my light colors, but that really isn't the case. You saw how dark I went in the shadow, particularly there on the left hand side. So keep that in mind. Quite often you have to go darker than you think. It's very easy in pastel to lighten. So if you feel like, oh, it's too dark, you can just take a lighter color, put it on top, and there you've got a lightened color. It's really, really easy. You can also go the other way. If it's too light, you can also darken down. But if you're wanting an extremely dark, like the background on the right, don't go in with the light color first. Go in with your darks. So I actually missed recording a lot of the motif. Oh dear, never mind. But you see a little bit of me working here on the right hand side. So again, I used a mixture of pastel pencils and the pastel sticks. First, I will get the base of the bone china in, and then I'll come back over and put the motif in. Now with this one, I made a bit of a mistake because I realized I hadn't gone light enough on the right hand side where the light is hitting the ginger jar. If you have a look, it's kind of dark, and then it's the same color all the way from the middle right through to the right, which is wrong. That right side needs to be much brighter. So I'm coming in with a light gray, and I had to, I just didn't get that light enough, so I had to redo this motif. And you can see it's quite easy to make corrections in pastel when you're working in light layers and when you've got a good paper. Like pastel mat, I find I never or seldom ever have a problem making corrections. Like I said, I do work in light layers. I'm not very heavy handed, and that just takes lots of practice, I suppose. But you can make corrections if you've got a good paper and you're light handed, like I said 300 times. But now it's much better because now we've got more contrast, okay? And I like that in my paintings. For me, it's about that contrast that creates that liveliness and like a dramatic effect, which I love. And one of my favorite periods of art is the 1600s. And if you look generally across the board, especially Flemish and Dutch artists, obviously Caravaggio as well, but he was earlier. The 1600s, they just focus on the light, this dark with light. Dark and light together is just what makes my heart sing. So I do try and create that in my work. So I changed a little bit in the reference photograph. You can see there's some, I don't know what they are, sort of grapey things, but I took those out and I decided to add a bit more almonds in the front there. And you saw me put in the blackberry, starting with a nice dark base. Those were the Terry Ludwig extra darks. And then working a little bit on the table, bringing in some grays mixed with those browns. And then working on the apple. Now this is fun. And this actually took me much longer than I anticipated. But just using a mixture of kind of dirty, swampy greens mixed in with some reddy browns as well as some pinks. And then, of course, some blue violets. So there's no white here. Those are blue violets that I'm using. Very, very pale blue violets. And getting the texture of the apple by using my pastel pencils. But if you've enjoyed this, you can see me do this in real time over on my Patreon. I shall leave a link in the description below. But thanks for watching and bye for now.